I think we can frame this debate and interview very much in the context of what is in the present and what's going to happen over another 5-year window. We don't have to take a snapshot of the next 14 years or 13 years ahead to 2030, but what you're faced with right now, what are your plans for the very near future, and then how do you maintain the kind of market share that you're building today in a business that gets disrupted absolutely all the time. So my first question to you is, how do you fend off competition? In a sense, you almost are challenging the national taxi system in Abu Dhabi, Dubai, and the other markets you're in, better than 50 cities throughout the Middle East, in North Africa, Pakistan, and Turkey today. How do you remain fresh, capture market share, and make sure you cannot be interrupted from the outside, would you suggest?
So, John, thanks for having me. I think as we heard, the vision for transportation in the future is quite different than it looks today. And as a startup based out of the Middle East that is trying to be a part of that future, the growth for us is somewhat incremental. So I'll just give you a quick introduction to how we started, which I think is a thesis of how the disruption will play out. So myself and my colleague, Magnus Olsson, the founders of Careem, we were consultants here in the Middle East who were constantly traveling. And we realized that as soon as you leave the UAE, ground transportation becomes quite challenging. You land in cities outside of this country, and the car doesn't come and pick you up in time. Sometimes it comes, you have to explain directions, then you have to pay in the local currency that you don't have. So we saw the whole experience that we were living as consultants as an opportunity, and we felt we could do better than that. So the idea of Careem was to make transportation reliable, make it seamless, and make it very, very convenient. And our initial version of the technology was just a basic website. Companies, their travel teams, their assistants could log in and say, John needs to go from Mubadala to the airport, and a car will come very reliably to pick you up, take you there. It'll charge your credit card, or it'll put it directly on the company's expense, and the service will be very, very seamless. So the story of Careem and the story of most startups is by identifying a need, identifying a problem to solve, and then launching it. And the DNA of the company is to always listen to the market, listen to the feedback from the market, and then develop things that solve that need and solve that problem. So when we first launched the service, it was fine for some time, and then we realized that a lot of our cars were getting lost because directions were not super accurate in maps like Google or others that existed. And we spoke to the guys at Google and said, can we improve them? And they said, yes, they will improve over time, but at the moment, Middle East is not a priority. So then what did we have to do? We had to go out and build our own maps because that was a need to solve our captains getting lost. Then we realized that at least in the UAE, a lot of captains or drivers come from the subcontinent. They're not very proficient in Arabic or English, whereas a lot of the customers speak English and Arabic. So how do we solve that? Because that was creating some friction in the service. So then we created a call center to bridge the gap between the captains and the customers. So, and there are like many examples of just finding a problem, listening to what is happening, what is working, what is not working, and then adapting to the needs of the market and developing it. So the way that we run Careem and the way that the organization is structured is the people that are closest to the customers, the people that are interacting with the customers and the captains are obligated to listen and are obligated and empowered to make decisions to improve the service to meet the needs of the customer. And we believe that by having that kind of a DNA in the organization and empowering the front line, we will always know what is needed, and we will make sure that the service is evolving and improving with the needs of the market.
Do you think having this kind of local DNA makes a difference? My question is a very pointed one, and I want to make sure we get directly to the points here as you set up the outline of the company. Do you have first mover advantage that you can protect against an Uber or a Lyft coming into the market then with the experience you've had so far?
Yes,
what's going to separate?
Yeah, so the two things that separate you. One is just understanding the customer and the market better and make sure that your experience is better than the experience of others that come from outside. So the fact that we have local maps, the fact that you can pay with your STC points or your Etisalat points, the fact that you have a call center that speaks your local languages, these are all differentiators and that make the service better than others for this market. So I think that's number one, the localization that makes the service better. And the second is scale. At this point, to your point on first movers, we have tens of thousands of cars that are operating in each of our markets. And any new company that comes to the market, if they don't reach the same scale or get close to it, it'll be very, very difficult for them to provide the same quality of service. So just imagine a new company comes to the market and launches in Cairo, where we have close to 50,000 cars. In Cairo, if they launch with 5,000 cars, you will not find their cars as
you have
readily.
50,000 in Cairo.
50,000 in
Well,
Cairo.
and you're over 200,000 cars today.
Overall.
in
And
the
Cairo
fleet.
is the largest city by volume in trips. So if a new company comes in, and even if they get 5,000 cars, which itself is a challenge, and it takes a lot of money to build that kind of capacity, you will not be as available as Careem, and you will not be able to get a car as fast to the customers as Careem. So naturally, you're disadvantaged. So in this industry, scale is a barrier, and scale makes sure that you will remain the better service in the market.
Good. How do you maintain quality? For example, we have different markets. Pakistan, you're active in. You're from Pakistan, native origin, worked in Silicon Valley, went to school at USC in Southern California. So you have that concept of American entrepreneurship, the DNA of a Silicon Valley person, and you want to transfer that to a market like Pakistan, which has its own elements of very important on security. Egypt, you said you have to fight against having drivers being drug tested and make sure that they are safe and secure to drive your customers. These are really big local challenges.
Yeah. So I think we're quite blessed in the UAE. The regulators here are quite strong. So they do a lot of work for us. When we work with a car or a driver or a captain in Dubai or Abu Dhabi, that person has already gone through a lot of vetting, and we're sure that this person is fine. When you go to a Pakistan or an Egypt, there is very weak regulation and even weaker enforcement. So we are effectively becoming the regulator because we need to now ensure that our cars are safe for the people that use the service and that they will get a reliable experience. So the quick joke is, when we first launched the service in Pakistan, my parents would not let me take a Careem because they just could not imagine a third party, picking me up from the airport, bringing me home, knowing where I live, and then they were always afraid that something would happen. Either there'd be a robbery at our place or I'll get kidnapped. So that's a constant fear. And if you don't overcome that,
you own the company, right?
Of course they knew, and they were quite opposed to it at the beginning. They didn't want their son becoming a taxi driver. But they overcame that, and then the security was the one that we had to overcome. So in a place like Pakistan, for example, this was a concern for many of our customers. So we actually partnered with a security company, the same company that does background checks for the American consulate, to do multi-layer background checks of every captain that works with us. And it's a very expensive and a very extensive check that goes to where they live in the city, puts a GPS pin on their house in the city they live, talks to the store, the police station, a few of the people that live around them, then goes to the village they come from and does the GPS pin on their village house as well, and does the same reference checks from people around. And that's what you need to do in a place like Pakistan to make sure that you're able to offer a safe service that people will trust. Otherwise, the service will not take off if you don't do these things.
Interesting. There's a lot of stuff to talk about, and we have about almost 15 minutes left. Unicorn valuation, which you were able to do on the last round, which means you're worth $1 billion, not in the publicly traded market, by the latest valuation. Blessing or curse? Everybody was benchmarking Souk.com to $1 billion, then it was sold for roughly $600 million. It put a lot of undue pressure on you to be a first mover that crosses that threshold and sustain in that sort of valuation? I guess it's a good problem to have, right? Because you're going to get wealthy along the way.
No, I think so we don't think valuation when you're building the business. You're looking for growth, you're looking for growing the business, providing experiences, and the valuation is an outcome, right? If you are growing, if you're doing well, and the business creates value, then the valuation will come. Now, the fact that the valuation did come, and the industry itself has become very prominent globally, has been, I think, has been incredible for the region, because it actually puts the region on the map. that this region, which many thought was a relatively small market,
Too fragmented. Right?
fragmented,
Right.
there is a way to build multi-billion-dollar businesses out of the region. And the region
So you're
has...
suggesting that Souk.com really kind of, it does change the game, the buy up by an Amazon.
No, I think it's a landmark transaction. And if you look at the evolution of technology companies, technology ecosystems, there has always been some landmark transaction. For example, in the Silicon Valley, it was the Netscape IPO back in 1994. That was a landmark, right? The Netscape happened, all of a sudden, internet came up. I believe that the Souk transaction is a similar landmark transaction because number one, it tells the world, because everyone is watching Amazon, that this region is important, it's a big market, it's a market worth being in. And second, it also hopefully wakes up the local businesses that this internet and technology industry is interesting. So I think it provides some sort of validation from a recognized global brand for technology in the region. So we'll hopefully see, and we will see more local companies, local businesses starting to get into technology as well.
Is it important to keep the capital close to home? I know you raised money from Al Tayer Travel, which is a very large Saudi business family, which I think is involved in publishing in Dubai as well. STC, which is a partner in the telecom space, Abraaj Capital, Dubai private equity. But for Saudi Arabia, for example, $3.5 billion going into Uber. Would this be a wake-up call to say to the local sovereign funds and even other private equity groups, come on, look closer to home, market better than 300 million consumers, you can keep the capital and grow faster here?
Yeah, so it's early still, right? I think the Souk transaction is a landmark one. The Careem reaching that unicorn status is also landmark. So the view is that over time, more and more of the local money will find local opportunities to invest in. Up until now, it's been challenging to find these opportunities. So the fact that we have done it, others are aspiring to do it now as well. And as we get successes like Souk and hopefully Careem, then more money will flow locally. But it's still early. You know, this region cannot absorb $3 billion of venture capital. If they came to us and said, we have $3 billion, we'd not know what to do with that money, right? We'd maybe go out and buy Uber.
To reverse, that's one way of getting scale, right? Few challenges here, and then I want to talk about the future of transport as well. You were stopped from service because of security reasons or background checks for drivers. Here in the UAE, security is a huge issue. I just chaired a security conference with Interpol yesterday. They mentioned how much it's linked to happiness because people feel very secure here. What was the hurdle to cross? How did you negotiate around it? What did you learn out of that process?
Yeah, so what had happened in Abu Dhabi was in the UAE, we work with licensed transport. So anyone that wants to come and work with Careem cannot work with Careem and provide the service, which is the case, let's say, in Saudi, which is allowed in Egypt or Pakistan and other markets. So in Abu Dhabi, there was a case where there were different regulatory regimes. So there is taxis, there are transport companies, and then there are limousines. We were working with transport companies and limousines, and then we found out that we cannot work with transport companies. We can only work with limousines that were sort of made for that purpose of passenger transport. So there was a small pause in our service in Abu Dhabi where we had to remove the transport company cars from our system. But there were not enough limousines at the beginning to serve the volume of business that we had. Yeah. So we had to reach some scale before we were able to reopen the service. And now the service is up and running in Abu Dhabi. It's smaller than it is in some markets because of some pricing configurations, but it's up and running and it's fine. Overall, on the regulatory topic, I think this region has been quite welcoming overall to companies like Careem than other governments have been to companies like Careem. And we haven't had stoppages or blocks at the scale that Europe has seen or even some parts of the US have seen. And I believe there are two reasons why that's the case. And you have to look at the region and not just look at the UAE, because I think the platform and the opportunity is to create a lot of jobs and to build a public transportation system that doesn't exist. If you go to a Cairo or a Karachi, these cities, and even many of the cities in Saudi, we didn't build public transport systems like those that were built in Europe or the US hundreds of years ago. So this is an opportunity for the first time to actually build an affordable and a reliable public transport system for the masses.
It's an interesting way of looking at it.
Right.
It's liberating too for, I think 80% of your customer base in Saudi Arabia, at least in some of the cities, are women. They can't drive, but it gives them free access to go to work, free access to get around. It's
Indeed.
revolutionary in that respect.
It is. When I travel to Saudi, and the reaction from Saudi women has been so encouraging. They talk about a pre-Careem Saudi and a post-Careem Saudi.
Wow.
And in a post-Careem Saudi, they're not dependent on their fathers, husbands, brothers, or that private driver that sometimes is available, sometimes is not. Now they're able to go when they want to go, whether it is to a friend, whether it is to school, whether it is to a mall. So there is that liberating mindset that starts to come across.
How do you define, if you will, Mudassir, innovation today? I know you're working with the Berlin R&D Center. What's going to be innovative? I know, for example, you're going with driverless pods, electric pods that His Excellency Mr. Tayyar showed us. I mean, you're going to introduce those in the market later this year, 2018, into Dubai. That's really happening.
Yeah. This is moving faster than I think all of us thought it would. And so driverless is happening. A lot of money is being spent and invested in it. Now, our strategy for the whole driverless future is that we will partner to make it happen. So we will not necessarily build the hardware for these driverless vehicles. And we will probably not also build the operating system for the driverless world, but we will build the best service layer around it to make it accessible to the customer. So let the likes of Volvo and others build the hardware. Let the likes of Google and others build the software. And then let us build a service layer that takes this technology and offers it to the consumer in the way the consumers want to consume it.
Right. So by this time next year, this will be up and operational. How many electric pods do you plan to have circulating in Dubai? I find it hard to imagine so fast.
Yeah, so technology is not the bottleneck here. The technology is there. I think the bottleneck is the regulatory framework coming into place for these driverless pods. Now, these pods, they don't have to be driverless on day one, right? If the regulatory framework doesn't come into place by the time we want to launch them, they can be driven by a captain, a Careem captain. So let's see how quickly the regulatory framework comes into place. But these pods can be on the roads as early as next year.
Okay. I'm almost thinking, to press you a little bit here, that this may have a shelf life of 15 years as a company. Looking at the presentation that's there with flying taxis and the Hyperloop that's going to be into place. Do you feel like you have a limited shelf life and have to make your money now? Or are you able to adapt with the future? Sounds crazy, I know.
We are part of the future.
Okay.
We are part of the future. Because how do you access all of these crazy things that are coming? How do you get a aerial drone to come and pick you up? How do you tell the aerial drone where you are? How do you pay for that aerial drone? What if something goes wrong? How do you get customer service from people that are running this aerial drone? So there's a huge service layer around it. That is what we are building.
So you'll adapt to each one of those technologies. You're ready to do that.
Absolutely. And that's what the Berlin Center is helping us do. Build the service layer to work with these advanced transportation systems that are going to come up in the future.
Ah, fascinating. So you're almost a service company more than literally a transportation company. You have to be able to adapt to that.
Absolutely.
Okay, so final thought. Travis Kalanick, the video that was taped by one of his drivers. I noticed the language you're using, and it's unique, of course, to Careem. You call them captains. They have equity in the company. What have we learned about fast-growing companies? You know the Silicon Valley mentality. I'm a Californian by birth. The idea is kind of knock down barriers, go as fast as you can. But what do you learn about taking care of your employees? And when you saw that from him, that video went viral around the world, how he was treating one of his own employees. What was the shock value for you as a CEO of a very young company that's been around since 2012?
I think, and I don't think Travis represents Silicon Valley. I think a lot of people in the Silicon Valley were quite upset to see that video, because I think from my experiences in the Valley, it has a culture built on trust and respect. And that wasn't reflected in that video in the way that it came out. Now, the foundations of Careem were quite different. I mean, Magnus, one of the co-founders, he had a brain surgery in 2011. And that's really what made him want to do something like Careem, build a legacy that he would leave on the world after he passes away. For me, it was a desire to build an institution in the region. So we would not have been doing what we are doing if we didn't see the impact that we could make in the lives of these captains that are working with us. And they have very challenging lives. If you speak to some of them, you'll realize that they live in very small rooms. They're even sharing a bed in multiple shifts. 80% of the money they make goes back home. A lot of that money gets spent in educating their kids because they want their kids to be like John when they grow up, that they see sitting in the back of their car versus like them driving the car. So it's really the impact on their lives that keeps us going. And we also realize it's great for business. If we look after them, they will look after our customers. It's very, very simple. Majority of the time that you spend with Careem is with that captain, not on the app, not on the call center. This is the single most important factor in the quality equation for Careem. So we have to look after them and they will look after the customers.
Good. Your final thoughts on the UAE, because I think it's very interesting, particularly in Dubai. They want to become a smart city of the future, and the timeline that Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid said to 2030. And even having this conference in Abu Dhabi, which has oil wealth and sovereign wealth, doesn't need to diversify, pushing the envelope to diversify. What are the common links between a Silicon Valley and that DNA that comes out of the Silicon Valley that can be germinated in the UAE? What's realistic and what you can transfer and have bubble up from the surface to create companies like Careem? Is it possible?
I view Dubai as a startup. Dubai is just the way it is run and the way it advances, it works like a startup. We have seen no government in the world put the kind of vision that Dubai puts across and then makes it happen. The execution is world class. So we wish more governments would be like the Dubai government, would have this kind of a future state in mind and then work to make that future. Some of the governments that we work with in the region still have laws that are coming from the days of the horse carriage, right? Like literally the law that we're trying to change in some of the countries is called the carriage law. So I think, so that's one on Dubai and the UAE as a whole. But the other thing that the UAE has done phenomenally well to build these technology R&D centric businesses, you need top talent. And this country has built a value proposition for top talent. So when I call engineers and technologists in the Silicon Valley trying to recruit them to Dubai or Abu Dhabi, they don't hang up the phone on me. They would hang up the phone if I tell them I want to bring them to Cairo or a Riyadh or a Karachi. They're actually listening and they're quite excited to move back. A lot of them are from the region in some shape or form. So this best of both worlds value proposition attracts talent, and the talent is needed to build these kind of businesses.
Okay. Really a pleasure to meet you face to face. I've read about you. We've had you on CNN. And as I said, for our program Marketplace Middle East, we've got to get in the field to kick the tires a little bit and see how the captains are doing. Nice round of applause.
Thank you very much.
Mudassir Sheukha of Careem.